Well, let's continue with the space theme and go live now to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where we're now moments away from the latest launch of a Soyuz ship bound for the ISS. RT's Donald Corter is there. Donald, months of preparation, all leading to this key nail-biting moment.
Absolutely. We're just moments away from witnessing the launch of the ISS. Actually, it just launched right there. You can see how intense the fire from the rocket's blasters are. And now the world wishes the international crew good luck, both in its flight and the scientific experiments that will be taking place on the ISS in terms of biotechnology. Earlier today, I spoke about Russia's first ever 3D printer and why it makes this expedition into the cosmos so important.
But here's another breaking story. There's been an emergency aboard the Soyuz spacecraft that was carrying an American astronaut and a Russian cosmonaut. They had to abort a launch after a failure of one of its rockets. You're about to see some of the video, so let's get right to CNN's Fred Pleitgen. He is live in Moscow with this developing story. Fred, what happened?
Hi, Alison. Yeah, it is actually developing as we speak. And you know, this was a major incident in this launch, but it also seems as though it could have been a lot more catastrophic as it was. We know from space travel, from incidents in the past, how small the margin of error is when you're shooting people into space. Trying to piece together what happened, here's what we know so far. This rocket took off with Nick Hague, the American astronaut, and the Russian astronaut, Alexei Ovchinin. And I would say about 3 minutes, a little less than 3 minutes into the flight, it was the second stage of the Soyuz booster rocket that seemed to have some sort of technical malfunction. I listened to the broadcast as it was going on, and it was amazing to hear the astronauts how calm they remained when they realized that this rocket was not working properly. They then detached the capsule from the rocket and went into what's called a ballistic descent back to Earth. That's basically a much faster descent than you would normally have if you're trying to get back to space. It seems that the parachutes deployed. They landed about 250 miles away from where the rocket took off. And the latest that we have, and again, this is just coming in, is that there are helicopters that have been on the way to the site of where they landed. We hear that the astronauts are alive and are apparently in good condition, as the Russians put it. Apparently, there are crews that are on the scene right now, Russian paratroopers actually jumping out of helicopters to get to that site as fast as possible. Of course, we'll keep giving you updates as to exactly how these astronauts are doing. Just a quick word, though. Nick Hague, the American astronaut, he's only been with the astronaut program of NASA since 2013. It was going to be his first flight into space, Alison.
Hey, Fred, that video is incredible. I mean, that's a very hard landing. It looks as though, I mean, it gives the impression that something explodes upon impact, but in fact, it looks like maybe they're just falling into kind of a dusty field.
Yeah, I think that it's probably them falling into a dusty field. You know, that area around Baikonur, which is actually in Kazakhstan, it's not even in Russia. You know, that's a very dusty kind of steppe type area that they would have been landing in. But of course, you're absolutely right. That landing, nonetheless, would have been fairly hard. They do deploy those parachutes, but of course, this is not a usual situation for that spacecraft to return. It is made to withstand a large amount of impact. That's how Russian space travel is, you know. That's the way their capsules do land, but it certainly does seem to be that it's harder than usual. But, you know, the real miracle in all of this, hard to call it a miracle, it's really unclear whether or not this is something that the astronauts initiated or whether the spacecraft initiated it themselves, is that they were able to get off that rocket as it was malfunctioning. Because, you know, we've seen in the past disasters in space travel, and they don't usually end as well as this one seems to have ended. So the Russians continuing to get us information. We're getting it as it comes along, but it really seems as though these two astronauts, I wouldn't want to say they got lucky, but they certainly seem to have been very calm, very cool, relaxed, and extremely professional in a very, very difficult situation.
Yes, you're so right, Fred. I mean, they survived. And just one more time, is NASA in touch with the American astronaut now?
Yeah. I'm not sure whether NASA is in touch with the American astronaut directly, but NASA has also put out information saying that they know that the astronaut is doing okay. Basically, what seems to have happened is that while all of this was going on, when they noticed that something was wrong with the booster, and then also after they detached and were in a descent, the astronauts pretty much at all times seem to have been in touch with mission control. Now, mission control not only has Russians in it, because of course this is a combined mission, it's got Americans in it as well. So NASA, through the folks that would have been in the Russian mission control room, they would have had contact with the two astronauts as well, so they would have known what's going on. Not the exact status of the astronauts, but certainly whether or not they were still alive, whether or not they were still conscious, and sort of how they were doing as they were coming down, and possibly also after they landed, Allison.
Oh my gosh, Fred, what a story, what video. Thank you for bringing us all of the developments in this breaking news, and obviously we will check back with you throughout the hour as you get more information.
Donald Corder, as we say, is live there, who's just been taking in developments on the ground, you know, not very far away, of course, from where that Soyuz craft took off. What is the latest you have, Don?
Well, here on the ground, I recall Igor Nazarov talking about the scrambling of helicopters, and we did indeed hear helicopter sounds around this area, and we could. It's possible to say that those are some of the helicopters that Igor was talking about. Another thing we saw, what looked to be a military vehicle driving around behind us, as well as perhaps some communications equipment that was obviously active. But just to reiterate. Reports are suggesting that the cosmonaut and the astronaut landed in Kazakhstan without injury. They're both alive, and emergency services are already scrambled to go get them. And reports say that they're to take 90 minutes from when they were scrambled to reach both cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin and astronaut Nick Hague. Now, what the problem was, of course, as we talked about before, some sort of engine problem on the rocket. And if you were watching our live feed of the launch before, it seemed as if everything was fine. The rocket went up into the sky, everything went according to plan. But something that some of the people in the crowd remember. That I remember noticing was that they recalled a sound that they likened to basically the sound of the rocket going into the sky. Several people said that they heard that sound maybe a minute or half a minute after. So we don't know if that's basically them coming back into orbit or into the atmosphere, but it's what people were talking about. So basically the main thing is that reports are suggesting that they're alive, not injured, and emergency services are on the way. We'll give you any updates as they come.
Okay, Don Corder live. Thanks very much for that, giving us a first-hand picture of really what he experienced there within the past 30 minutes or so when that launch went off. Just another line on this before we go to a guest on the programme. According to reports, NASA TV, again I stress these are reports, NASA TV is reporting that the crew is in good condition and are in touch with the rescue teams. Igor, good news.
Yeah, this is good news. And also another reports we're getting here is that apparently the whole program of manned flights and cargo flights flying out of Russia will be reviewed. This is a source, this is a report we're getting on news wires.
Okay, well, let's go now to our guest on the programme, Klisman Maratzi, director of Panagia Wine, who has got a lot of background in the space programme. Just wondering if you can hear me at the moment. Hi, Klisman, can you hear me? Okay, we're having a little bit of...
Yes, I can.
Yeah, there we go. We've got Klisman, welcome to the programme. Thanks so much for coming on at short notice in what is a very topsy-turvy situation here at the moment. How do you think what is unfolding right now is going to perhaps affect the space programme? It's been over 40 years since we saw something like this with Soyuz. How long could it get to get this mission to the ISS now?
I'm not sure that that's a question to me. I'm here to speak about something else. There might be confusion. I'm not here to speak about the space program.
I apologise for that. Sometimes our wires do get crossed when there is live breaking news happening. But do stay with us, because I'm sure
more than
we'll
happy to give you my personal opinion, but I'm certainly not. I'm not a space expert.
Yeah, I'm sure you're watching.
Thank you very much.
Just as we all are, just with a lot of interest into how this develops, you know. Thank you for that for now. But let's just recap our breaking news here in RT International. A Soyuz craft going to the International Space Station around 45 minutes ago has had some trouble. We do know that a rocket malfunction during blastoff forced the two-man crew to abort. They had to make an emergency landing. According to NASA TV, that the crew is in good condition, in touch with rescue teams. That is a report from NASA TV. We cannot verify that at the moment. NASA's mission crew in Houston confirmed that the crew would be attempting a ballistic re-entry, which they now seems to have done. Rescue teams are heading to the location. They're expected to be around an hour away right now. Any signs or any updates on that, we will, of course, bring you up to date with. The two-man crew are Russian Commander Alexei Ovchinin and US flight engineer Tyler Haig. I'm also joined in the studio by Igor Nazarov, who has been following developments, has been following the launch as well in the last few hours.
Yeah, I've been following the launch, and I'm actually looking at the latest. And apparently, the director of the Russian Space Agency has confirmed that the crew is back on Earth, that the crew is alive and well. We're not no information on the injuries, but even if they are injured in any way, it does not seem that those are significant wounds. So just once again, I want to stress this is coming from the director, from the head of the Russian Space Agency, that the crew is back on Earth, it's alive, and the rescue teams are indeed there. Well, they're searching the area. They should be approaching the crew right now as we speak. There are 4 helicopters in the air getting to the crew, so this is important. Now, just to recap the launch, how it happened, because I followed it beginning to end. It seemed that everything was going fine until the first modules split from the rocket, because we could overhear, we could hear all the communications between the Earth, the people on Earth, and the crew inside the rocket, and everything we could hear, like everything's fine, all systems normal, that sort of talk. And apparently right before the second module was supposed to split, or around that time, some emergency situation happened. The second module engines, they shut down, and the whole rocket went into the mode of the ballistic descent. This is what they call it. The procedure is that there's a special module built in the rocket that is responsible for this descent. So they just parachuted down on Earth, and now we do know that they are on Earth. They are doing fine. They're well, and well, hopefully rescue teams will be getting to the crew very shortly.
Let's put that very point, because it is a very timely one, to our guest on the programme. We're coming to Klisman Murati, Director of Panagea Wine, a risk analysis consultancy that also specialises on the space industry. You're welcome to the programme. I suppose, just as our correspondent was explaining, their crews, mission control, they're prepared for emergencies like this. But what kind of effect do you think this could have on the manned launches, which are slated in the next few months? Because it does go very much into the forward, things like this, a lot of planning.
Sure, that's very, very true. I think this this failure of this launch today is a big lesson for the engineers. And NASA, they need to really assess what happened with this launch, why it failed, and how they can prevent this from happening in the future. No doubt, tests will be made to make sure this won't happen again, and there'll be a lot of pressure, I believe, on NASA to make sure things like this don't happen. Given that it was a manned action which could have risked life. So this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Many other space agencies will learn from this as well to make sure this doesn't happen to them. So it's yet to be seen what actually happened, what the faults were, but as soon as they uncover that, I think they'll be in a much better position next time when they launch.
Just give us the overall picture here, just how dangerous and delicate an operation are such launches.
Sure. Well, you're dealing with many different factors that are all happening together. Engineers need to make sure that all the little cogs are working in succession with each other to make sure this is a successful mission. If not, worst case scenario, we could see death, we could see a lot of destruction, we could see a loss of confidence in NASA and in space missions in the future. Best case scenario, they come back safely and they learn from this. Obviously, outer space is something that NASA and US want to promote. They want to make sure they do more of these launches to be successful in outer space. So every precaution needs to be taken seriously to make sure no serious damage is done.
Yeah, Soyuz is known for its safety. You have to go back, what, 43 years for something similar to have happened. And in that case, all the crew were safe. We're hoping that is the very same situation this time around. But how much of a setback could this be for the ISS Expeditions roster itself? Because it's due to launch in December, I believe.
Sure, that's true. Well, again, the engineers need to make sure they find out what happened in the first place. Nothing can be set, nothing could be planned unless they figured out what actually happened. And if what happened on this launch, there's risk of it happening again in other launches. So as soon as they figure this out, they will replan and restructure their timetables, I believe, to make sure everything is on schedule.
Of course, it's not just the two-man crew who this is going to affect and their families, of course. It's the three people, I should say, aboard the International Space Station right now, because they're awaiting supplies, they're awaiting various different kinds of information, different kinds of technical expertise coming to join them. How much of a setback for them is this?
It's a very delicate operation, as you can imagine. Exploring outer space isn't something you can do every day without the technical knowledge and know-how of how to do it. For sure, this will be a rumble, I think, within NASA. They'll need to make sure that things like this, risks like this, are kept to a very, very minimum so that future space launches are successful. Everyone will be asking questions of what they can do better to make sure communication between the space station and the crew on board is much better so that they can report issues quicker if they see them. So again, this is a learning experience for NASA.
Yeah, I'd say a minute is like an hour for the families of the cosmonaut and astronaut on board at times like this. You really have to think of them in these situations too, don't you?
100%. Going into outer space is a very proud moment for the families. You know, their husbands and their wives in all capacities are happy for them. So when something like this happens, you know, the worst case scenarios come into your mind, as you can imagine, and you just hope for them to be safe when they come back and that they learn from this so that, you know, something worse doesn't happen into the future.
Okay. We've also got, just to let you know, we've got Igor Nazarov in the studio. Igor's been keeping abreast of, he's been following really the launch from early morning. He'd like to ask you something.
Yes, well, what we're getting reports that already the investigation will look into the operations of the factory that produced the rockets, and it will check all 5 similar rockets that are already there, that have already been produced. So my question really is, how could this affect the launches, the space programs of Russia, of the United States, and since Russia is the only country that is capable of sending people in orbit right now?
Well, again, the key word to remember in this, I think 2 key words, is due diligence. Everything needs to be seen with a fine-tooth comb. They're going to go through every procedure. They're going to go through every manufacturing piece to see what happened and how they can avoid this from happening again. Space is a frontier that many of the superpowers are wanting to explore and wanting to make sure they have the best prestige for it. So this not only, I think, will hit NASA in terms of the technicals, but it may lose confidence in NASA, perhaps in the short term. But if they do fix this, and if they do come around with the successful missions going forward, this will hopefully boost their confidence in outer space missions for the whole world to enjoy.
Just getting a line on this, Klisman, from the head of Roscosmos speaking to RT. In fact, the crew has landed. Everyone is alive. Your initial reaction to that?
Well, of course, it's very, very good. The worst thing that we can imagine is these crew members to have died in this case. So I'm very happy that they have managed to, come out of this happy, no, not happy, but well, and hopefully they'll learn from this experience. But right now they need to calm their nerves. They need to make sure their families know about this in the first place and bring them home safely so they can take their time with their next missions.
Just another aspect to this, I'm not sure if you're totally up to fate with it. It's okay if you're not, of course, but this was a two-man crew. Is that very unusual? It's normally 3 people on board, is it not?
Well, they had the third person. They had cargo in that third place, obviously. So it depends on why they go into these missions. Two-man crew. Again, I think I can't speak too much about it only because I'm not. It's not within my remit. Sure. But the more people I believe are there, the more checks they can do on internal processes for the actual spaceship itself to make sure that all potential risks are covered. But there was obviously a reason as to why it was a two-man mission. They had cargo in it as well, so perhaps they need to reanalyze if there are more people in there, could they have done something better to improve the situation, or was it there a technical fault that they couldn't perhaps cover? So that's the question for the engineering team and for NASA itself.
Incredible experiments about to be done on board when that crew docked at the ISS in around 6 hours. That was the hope when the launch happened. There was 3D printer equipment on board with a view to making, I think, muscle matter, or something, like an incredible type of situation going on there. How much do you know about that?
I didn't really hear what you said. Could you repeat that?
Some of the equipment, we know that there was solar panels, obviously, for energy on board the ISS. We also know that there was 3D printer equipment with a view to actually carrying out a number of experiments on board. It's getting ever more modern. A lot of experiments happening all the time up there in orbit.
Sure, I think something that's exciting for me, this is why I got into the field of outer space in the first place, is because the possibilities are honestly endless to the capacities in which we can provide for them. So as soon as they can find a new way of doing things in outer space so that they can save on things like space debris and on endangering the lives of people who go into outer space, so they can clean up the ecology of space in general, I think that's a good thing. So any new innovation that promotes safety, that promotes innovation, scientific knowledge, is always a great step forward. And these things we see with this launch and future launches and past launches is always a need to innovate to make sure that the systems they have in place are respectful of the space system, that it minimizes risk to the crew on board and to space in general, and to further our knowledge of space for the greater use of humanity.
We've been speaking to Klisman Murati, Director of the Panagea Wire Consultancy. We thank you for your time and coming on the programme after such short notice as well.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Igor, so a lot of new information coming in, and while we're just carrying out that interview as well, bring us up to spec with what we know now.
Well, the most important thing, we have confirmation from 2 sources right now. One is the director of the Russian Space Agency, Rogozin, who says that the crew is indeed back on Earth, they're alive and they're safe. Also, the Kazakh Interior Ministry is also confirming this information, and they are saying that, well, they do not need any help on the Kazakh side. Now, unconfirmed reports, though, suggest they will still be taken to a hospital because this is the procedure, because while there may be no visual injuries or anything, still better safe than sorry. They will get a thorough medical checkup as the rescue crews get to them. Now, we do know that at least 4 helicopters are circling around the area of their landing, that they were actually watching them parachuting back down on Earth. So they do know a pretty precise location of where they landed. Now, in terms of the investigation, obviously there will be a big one. And according to other reports we're getting, the manufacturer of the Soyuz rocket will be looked into. Investigators will look into its operations, and they will also check all similar Soyuz rockets that have already been produced. They will be checked and rechecked. So this is what we know in terms of the safety of the crew and of the investigation.
And for the timetable as well, as we were talking about earlier, that you don't want to put that too much off, because it affects not just the people going to the ISS, but the people up there who are in need of resources and a lot of other things, really, to keep them on board in safety and in health, really.
Indeed, this is a very good point, because according to other reports that we're getting is that the all manned and cargo flights, pretty much all flights from Baikonur, they are being put on hold until the investigation makes until the investigation produces at least some results. So, but obviously the ISS, the 3 people on the ISS, 1 cosmonaut and 2 astronauts, they need supplies. Of course, they do have like a good stockpile there still then, because but the possibility of such emergencies is being taken into account every time cargo is delivered there. So this is the situation right now. This is where things stand so far.
Just by the way, tell us why there was 2 people, not 3 people, on the Soyuz going to the ISS. What do we know about that?
Well, we know that this is the mission, because like there's 1 cosmonaut who's on the station right now, Sergei Prokopyev. So there's another one, Alexei Ovchinin, is going there to help him out, and 1 American astronaut to kind of fill in the blank spaces with the NASA crew.
Okay, just another line on this coming in. The Soyuz crew landed about 20 kilometers east of Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan. I'm sure I'm getting that word wrong, according to NASA. So more information coming in about the exact points of this, which is good news. We heard, as Igor was saying, Roscosmos chief Rogozin saying that everybody is okay, the crew is alive, a little bit shaken up, but I'm sure happy to be back down to Earth as well on this. And that's the information. You want to hear that, and then you want to hear that the families have been told and they're okay.
Hopefully they have. So also what we know also from the head of Roscosmos is that the commission, the investigative commission, is already looking into the data, into the telemetry of the flight. So like they were already analyzing the first, like the data, the technical entries in the journal that they were getting from the Soyuz rocket as it was blasting into space. Also, we know that apparently military parachutists are already descending. They have already been deployed to the place of descent of the crew. So they have indeed been located precisely. So
Zhezkazgan is the
Zhezkazgan, yes. Apparently this is the name. Hopefully we are getting it right now. So it's 25 kilometers off the Zhezkazgan Kazakh area. So this is
in the midst of the steppe, really, isn't it? Where there wouldn't be people living. It would just be a vast area, nobody else around. That's why. That's one of the prime reasons for the shuttle actually taking off from there. Igor, one of the aspects of this, of course, it kind of knocks things out of sync, because we know that in around 2 weeks from now, Ovchinin and Prokopyev, as you say, who is the other cosmonaut, the Russian cosmonaut up there, they were supposed to carry out a spacewalk, which we know is crucial work that they're doing up there. So that kind of now, whether there's going to be another launch, but you can't just go ahead and do it the next day. There's so much planning, so much preparation for something like that.
Well, indeed. So it has to be put on hold. There's also another thing about of course, about the holes in the ISS. There was a big...
what's that about? That was a huge story.
Yeah, there was a big scandal, and in fact, the investigation is still going on into that. So first there was discovered in the hull of the ISS, in one of the module, the crew discovered, well, a hole, just a hole, and no one knows where it came from, but then a few more were discovered as well. So obviously a big scandal. It's unclear. The investigation is ongoing. It's unclear where it came from. Either there was something, either this was a mistake or something on behalf of the assembling crew when the International Space Station was only being put into orbit, or, well, whether or not one of the people on board did that, which is unthinkable, frankly, for me personally. But, well, all versions are being looked at. And apparently we can show you the timeline of the launch. So let's have a look at that. Yes, so here's what's been going on. And first there was... So there was a blast, then reports shortly after the launch that the rocket booster malfunctioned. Then the Soyuz spacecraft made the emergency landing. All on board, we do know now, are alive and unharmed. Now, I just want to add very quickly that apparently this emergency happened somewhere around when the second booster was supposed to split from the rocket. And prior to the launch, I think, we spoke to the wife and the mother of the Russian cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin, who described to us how it feels as a relative to watch a mission take off. Obviously, some soul-crushing moments for them to relive right now.